The Archdiocese of St. Louis issued a statement on June 28th in response to recent calls for the removal of a statue of King Louis IX, the city's namesake. According to the statement, Louis IX, a Catholic saint and 13th century king of France, was an imperfect man who strived to live a life modeled after the life of Jesus Christ. The Archdiocese also cited reforms the king implemented and his work on behalf of the poor and sick. He even invited them to his table. In recent days, violence has erupted at the site of the statue, with a number of Catholics who had gathered to pray the rosary. We'll have more on that story later. And Archbishop of San Francisco, Salvatore Cordileone, and several other Catholics gathered in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco to pray days after a mob tore down a statue of Saint Junipero Serra earlier this month. A crowd of about 100 people toppled the statue of the saint, who was instrumental in founding the California mission system in the 18th century. The Archbishop said, "I feel such a great wound in my soul when I see these horrendous acts of blasphemy disparaging the memory of Serra." Archbishop Cordileone and those gathered with him prayed the rosary as well as prayers of exorcism as an act of spiritual reparation. Joining me now with analysis of the anti-religious chaos that seems to be sweeping the country and much more is President of the Catholic League, Bill Donohue. Bill, thank you for being here. I have to start with a video that was, this video, Bill, was released by a local CEO of Catholic Charities in Eastern Washington. Rob McCann is his name. It was released last Friday. He began his message by making a stunning admission about himself, his organization, and the Catholic Church.
The death of George Floyd has changed me in a way that is likely long overdue. It has made me realize some important things about my own life that maybe I always knew, but never truly embraced with enough blunt truth. I am a racist. That's the hard truth. I am a racist. How could I not be? My Catholic Church and my Catholic Charities organization is racist. How could they not be? Our Catholic faith tradition was built on the premise that a baby born in a manger in the Middle East was a white baby.
Bill, the Church of St. Augustine, an African, Martin de Porres, Pierre Toussaint, Mother Henriette de Lille, all black people, that's racist. 3 of our early popes were Africans. What is he talking about, Bill?
Well, first of all, I'd have to say he has a moral obligation to resign immediately. I do not want a racist, a self-confessed racist, heading any Catholic agency, Catholic Charities or any place else. And if he doesn't resign, he should be removed. We cannot have white racists running any Catholic agency. Now, he also needs to be educated. The first person publicly to condemn slavery in the history of the world was St. Patrick. In 1537, Pope Paul III forbade slavery and threatened excommunication to any Catholic who was involved in it. He followed the natural law teaching practiced by Father Las Casas in working with the Indians. No, people who are educated know that racism is something the Catholic Church has long fought against. And if you have a problem with yourself, then, and you have been involved in racism, maybe you've been involved in discrimination, in which case he needs to turn himself over to the authorities.
Yeah. How do you explain, Bill, a CEO of Catholic Charities branding the entire organization and his church as racist? I assume the poor should avoid Catholic Charities at all costs, because why should they be giving their money or their time or seeking help from a racist organization? What is going on here? What's driving this, do you think?
What's driving this is white guilt. It's the bane of self-righteousness. It's a moralizing. These people are occupying a moral perch. And what this man is doing, he's looking down his nose at everybody else. This idea that we're all racist, of course, means that there's no such thing as racism. Now what you have is somebody who made a racist joke is in the same category as the Klan. And of course, if he does have a problem, and maybe he does have a deep-seated problem, he's a self-confessed racist, he has to deal with that. But he should not project his own inadequacies and his bigotry onto others. I've worked in the Catholic Church and gone to Catholic schools all my life. I've met very few racists, and the few that I've met have been shunned as they should be. But this is an idea of what's going on today. I am actually better than you because I can admit that as a white man, I am a racist. That in itself is a racist statement. That you make a collective argument that because of the color of your skin, white, black, brown, or red, yellow, whatever it might be, that therefore you are indelibly racist. That is a racist statement. We don't need to listen to people like that anymore.
Yeah. Well, I remember Pope John Paul II apologizing to the world for individual acts of people in the church over time. But he never said the entire institution is racist, or an entire organization, or all people of one skin color are racist. I mean, it is a rather staggering statement, and I'm surprised there hasn't been more blowback. Now, McCann goes on to say, as CEO of Catholic Charities, that he supports Black Lives Matter. Does that concern you?
It does, because, I mean, there are people out there who say, well, I like the idea of Black Lives Matter, and if they mean it in the innocent sense, that black lives should matter to white people, I have no problem with that. If, however, and people need to get educated, you're talking about the organization of Black Lives Matter, people should know that Black Lives Matter has the same policy agenda as the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan and Black Lives Matter are against funding the police. They're against school choice. They're in favor of abortion across the board, particularly very happy with the disproportionate number of abortions of black people. So it's also an organization which on their own website admits to being a Marxist communist organization, and it's also queer-oriented, as they like to say. Now, we've seen enough of what communists have done in history. In the Soviet Union, in Cambodia, in China, we know what they do. If you want to oppress black people, and you have to follow the agenda of the Klan and Black Lives Matter, and that's why the Supreme Court decision in favor of school choice is something that the Black Lives Matter and the Klan and elements of the Democratic Party are not too happy about.
Bill, I want to get your reaction to the crisis in New York City, your beloved city. Just last week, Mayor de Blasio and Governor Cuomo were told by a U.S. District Court judge they cannot place undue restrictions on churches during this pandemic, yet allow secular gatherings, including protests and rioting, to go on. They are accused of exceeding their authority. Why do you think they and other state and local leaders are singling out religious gatherings and restricting them, even when they're adhering to the COVID guidelines?
Because they have an animus against Christianity. There's no question about that. And against Jews, by the way. De Blasio went against the Orthodox Jews, not just Catholics in New York City. Look, people asked him flat out, how can you allow, without any social distancing, people joining hands by the thousands, night after night after night, many of them violent and looters? How can you allow this as a public health concern when you're supposedly concerned about COVID? And he said it's because I agree with their cause. So if you agree with the cause of the demonstration, then public health doesn't matter. You know what's happened? I speak to a lot of New Yorkers, both in the suburbs and in the city. White, black, male, female, young and old. The credibility of Cuomo and de Blasio is shot. It's even shot amongst many of the people who purportedly were on their side, because they can see that there's no principle involved here. It's all politics. There's no level playing field. He goes against Orthodox Jews for wanting to participate in their services. He wants to lock up the churches, and yet the protests, because he believes in their cause. No, these people are an embarrassment to New York. And by the way, New York is going bankrupt. I hope people understand that. There's nobody in Manhattan. I've been in work for 2 weeks in New York out of Long Island. I work in the city. Everybody's allowed to go back just about in phase 2, all the office people. It's a ghost town. It's a ghost town. The only people you see in the morning are drugged out crazies, because people are working remote. They got used to it, and they're afraid of the virus, and they're afraid of the violence. The city of New York is in deep trouble.
Well, we're seeing these spikes all over the country, and I love it, in COVID cases, not in deaths, cases. And yet no one's blaming or even asking the question, well, might these protests, when you have 6% of the national population going out and protesting, side by side, might that have contributed to the COVID spread? It's not a question anybody even asks. But speaking of the Mayor de Blasio, he announced this week, Bill, he's planning to cut the New York City Police Department budget by $1 billion. This at a time when the city has become a powder keg with these protests. Here's how de Blasio explains it.
My office presented to the City Council a plan that would achieve $1 billion in savings for the NYPD and shift resources to young people in a way that would help address a lot of the underlying issues that we know are the cause of so many problems in our society.
So, Bill, defunding the police is now savings for the department. How do you think New Yorkers are feeling? How are you feeling about fewer law enforcement resources available to your NYPD?
Well, it fits in perfectly with what Cuomo and de Blasio did. Cuomo signed the bill. It went into effect January the 1st of this year. As soon as the cops arrest somebody, he's automatically let go on bail. We have thousands of thugs walking the streets of New York. A guy last week hit a woman, 91 years of age, smashed her head up against this fire hydrant. That was his 103rd arrest. The cops have not finished filling out the paperwork, and the thug is back on the streets. This is anarchy, and the elites won't stand up to it in New York, Minneapolis, Seattle. Mob rule is the rule. And the Democratic Party will not speak out against it, and even a lot of Republicans will not speak out against it. They don't want to hold up a stop sign. They're cowards. But when it comes to having a demonstration, if I ask de Blasio, can I have a permit for a demonstration to protest anti-Catholicism, I know what he'd tell me. And these people don't even have to get a permit. They broke into the places right where I work on 34th and 7th in New York, across from Madison Square Garden and Penn Station. We have pictures of it. The looters, you know who they were? White women. Guess what car they used as their getaway? A Mercedes-Benz. I could go on with one story after another. You can't buy a hot dog or a newspaper in the area where I work, which is usually so jammed with people, you have to walk in the street. New Yorkers who live in the outer boroughs and in the suburbs have not come back, and the city is crippled.
Boy, I mentioned this earlier, Bill, the assault we're seeing on religious statuary around the country, from Junipero Serra to St. Louis. The St. Louis protest was organized by a Muslim activist, several of them actually, who want the city's name changed. They wish to do so to promote religious diversity. Your take?
Yeah, religious diversity. The one thing that Islam has not given us is a lot of diversity. And he could begin by cleaning up his own act. You know, remember H. Rap Brown, the black leader back in the 1960s? White people had said to him, what can we do to help? He said, go back into your own backyard and clean up your own mess with the white people. That's what I have to say to this radical Muslim. Don't lecture me as a Catholic what you're going to do about my religion and my statues. Why don't you go back and work with your fellow Muslims, many of whom admittedly are good people, but you still got a problem there. Clean up your own act there, and then I'll sit down and talk with you.
You can read Bill Donohue's columns and follow his work at the Catholic League. He's at catholicleague.org. Bill Donohue, thank you.
Thank you.